Hey everybody, welcome. We're here again with my research updates. I'm with Lipedema Simplified. I'm Leslyn Keith. I'm the Director of Research for the Lipedema Project, and I love to get together with you twice a month to give you information on what's happening in the field of research that has really implications for lipedema. So I have a couple of things here for you today. One is about a meeting that happened recently that has to do with research and specifically for lymphatic conditions like lipedema. And the other is I have a wonderful paper to share with you. There's another nutrition paper that has to do with lipedema that was the participants in the study had lipedema. So I got some great stuff for you today. While I am talking, please jot some things down in the comments. If you want to make a comment about the things that I'm reporting on, or if you have a question, even not even related to what I'm reporting on, we just love to be able to interact with people who are watching me live. And it's also instructive for whoever might be watching this replay. So please do that. I also love when you tell me where you are in the world. So be sure and put something, post something and talk with me as I'm going on here. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is something pretty exciting happened on April 29th, just a couple of weeks ago. And it was the first public meeting of the National Commission on Lymphatic Diseases. And so this is a commission that was formed by the National Institutes of Health, and really by lobbying efforts by people like you and the Lymphatic Education and Research Network. This is so important. I want to talk to you about this. It is this commission, which is the first ever commission on lymphatic diseases. They've had other commissions at the NIH before, but not anything on lymphatic diseases. And so this was the first ever. So this is pretty monumental that it happened. And really in the last commission that the particular wing of the NIH that lymphatic diseases are part of, that's the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. The last commission they had was in the 1990s. So they've now created this new commission to look at lymphatic diseases, and it happens to be on lymphatics. So that's pretty cool. So the aim of this commission is to advance research in the area of lymphatics, and it was established in December of 2023. So just recently, they have been meeting, but this was the first public meeting and it was held virtually. So I was able to sit in on the meeting on April 22. And I'm sorry, it has it on I have the date there on there wrong for you. I said April 29, but it is April 22 that this happened. So just a couple of weeks ago. And so what they are directed to do is to gather information and identify the gaps in lymphatic research. They want to also find any roadblocks that there are in generating and completing research with the ultimate goal of improving the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of lymphatic diseases. Tall order. But this commission is co-chaired by Dr. Stanley Roxon. And so couldn't think of a more perfect person to be there. And in a discussion with Dr. Roxon after this meeting, he used an analogy that you might have heard him use before in other talks, but he has a particular analogy that he uses to describe the lymphatic system. And he says, for instance, if you are asked to describe a brick wall, you might be describing what is the color, the shape, the texture of the bricks on the wall, but you never talk about the mortar. And really, that's the mortar is what holds the brick wall together and makes it a wall. If you didn't have mortar, you just have a pile of bricks. And so what Dr. Roxon says, that's what the lymphatic system is. It's the mortar of our body. It's so integral for every cell, for the functioning of every organ. And so, what I quoted him as saying is that it's high time we started recognizing the importance of lymphatics. And that's what this commission is doing. It's really putting the lymphatic system on front and center, and then we need to study this more. And so it has 15 members, and they're researchers, they're clinicians, there's patients that are on this commission. And I recognize many of the people that are on it. These are people who have written papers. They're clinicians that I know. So it's a really nice group that is working. Each member is going to serve a 2-year term. And at the end of that 2 years, they're going to have a report. And so they're really looking to have comprehensive findings about lymphatics and the burden of lymphatic diseases in the United States. And they want these findings and recommendations will, of course, go to the NIH, but potentially to other federal agencies, and should have a really big impact on research and care for lymphatic diseases in the US. I have another quote from Dr. Roxon, and he says, "We hope that we will uncover approaches and mechanisms that can be implemented to create a new and better world for lymphatic research, healthcare, and education." So this is pretty exciting, pretty important, and I'm thrilled to tell you about that. So now going on to the paper that I wanted to share with you today. This paper is called "Effect of a Low Carbohydrate Diet on Pain and Quality of Life in Female Patients with Lipedema, a Randomized Controlled Trial." And this just came out in April of 2024. It was written by, and the study was conducted by researchers in Norway. The lead author is Julianne Lundanes, which I just found out in Swedish, Lundanes means Londoner. How interesting. But the senior author is actually Dr. Siren Nimmo, and she presented at a previous Lipedema Simplified heart-to-heart event that we had done on nutrition. And so she is a senior author in this paper. And if you would like to look it up yourself, we'll have the link below. And it also, I'll just let you know, it's in the peer-reviewed journal Obesity that just came out in April 2024. So, and the reason Dr. Nimmo, I'm so excited that she's on this paper, because she was also the senior author on a earlier pilot study. You might have heard of it. It was called Lipo Diet, and this was also completed in Norway, but it was a pilot study. It had 9 participants with lipedema. And so quite often before you do a randomized controlled trial, you do a pilot study, and that's what she did. And that's what she presented at our conference a couple of years ago, was the outcomes of this pilot study. And she said at that time, her goal was really to complete a randomized controlled trial, which now she has done. So I'm pleased to report to you the results of this. So the primary outcome of this, again, that she was looking at, as she did with the pilot study, she wanted to evaluate the effect of a low carb diet compared to a standard diet, meaning higher carb, on pain that is associated with lipedema. So that was the primary thing she was looking at, but she also was looking at what was the impact of the 2 patterns of eating on quality of life, and also to see if there's any associations between your level of ketosis and pain, weight, and body composition. So I see I should probably define ketosis for those of you that may not be familiar with that term. So ketosis is a metabolic state that is characterized by raised levels of ketone bodies in the body tissues, and it's evidence that your body is burning fat rather than burning glucose for energy. And so this metabolic state of producing ketones is achieved by eating either a ketogenic diet or some kind of carbohydrate restriction, or in the short term, they can also be generated by fasting. So now let's talk about the methods that were used for this study. So they had adult female patients with lipedema and obesity, actually, and they were randomized and placed into one of 2 diet groups. The first was a low carb diet. So this is not carbohydrate restriction enough to be considered ketogenic, but it was definitely carbohydrate restriction. So it was low carb. And the other was the controlled diet that had higher levels of carbohydrates in it. And the participants all underwent assessments at the beginning of the study, and then at the end of the study, and then once per week during the intervention. And the intervention lasted 8 weeks. So while the diet groups were all matched for calories, so both groups were told to target or be less than, excuse me, 1,200 calories per day. And then they were also the same for protein. So they were all told to eat around 60 grams of protein per day. But where they were different is how much carbs and how much fat they had per day. So the low carb group was supposed to eat 75 grams of carbs and 73 grams of fat per day. And that's compared to the controlled diet, which was to eat 180 grams of carbs. That's compared to 75. And 27 grams of fat. That's compared to 73 in the other group. So you can see how those were the two things that were different. Protein and number of calories were the same. So they were also asked to not change their level of physical activity. Whatever they were doing for exercise and movement and stuff like that before the study began, they were to continue doing that same thing. So let's look at what type of assessments that they use to test and see what was happening in this study. The first is they wanted to have ways to see how adherent the participants were to their particular diet. And so this was assessed weekly, either by phone or face-to-face, and they used daily food records. And that was basically analyzed to see how many calories they were eating, and also what was the macronutrient content, meaning how many grams were they getting of fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And then they also evaluated ketosis. This had to be done by coming into the study center. And so they did both urine and blood ketone testing to see what their ketones levels were, because you would expect more carbohydrate restriction, higher ketone levels. And so, interestingly, they had this little thing they did when they were looking at the ketone levels. If a participant in the low carb group was out of ketosis, or a participant in the control diet group was in ketosis more than twice throughout the study, then they did not use them for some of the statistical analysis, because they wanted to see the effect that ketosis had on, a group that was in the low carb and what not being in ketosis in the higher carb group. So they then excluded those people from some of that statistical analysis. That was very interesting. And so that meant that actually 17 out of 35 participants in the control diet, which was higher carb, apparently they were in ketosis twice out of that study. So 17 of those 35 people were not in the calculation. How in the world did that happen? That is very interesting. So, I'd love to talk to Dr. Nimmo to find out, why she thinks that might have happened. So they also assessed, they did weight, they did body composition, so how much fat, fluid, lean mass, and stuff like that on each person. And then they did a brief pain inventory. So this was a survey that each participant, is a self-report. They talk about their pain. It looks at a lot of aspects of their pain. And how, for instance, also not only the intensity, but how much does it interfere with daily activities, with mood, with sleep, etc. And then they had 3 quality of life measures that they looked at, and one of them, one was a general quality of life according to health, and the next was a quality of life that has to do with being overweight or obese. And the last was a quality of life that was actually, it was a lymphedema quality of life measure, but they thought that this was as close as they can get to lipedema. And so they wanted something that was more disease specific. And so they used that one. So I think they really covered their bases really well with that. So now let's talk about the results. So I haven't told you yet, but there were 70 participants in this study. And so they put 35 into each of these 2 groups. The average age was 47, average BMI was 37. The type of lipedema they had most commonly, it was actually type 3 combined with type 4. How interesting. And type 4, remember, is your arms are involved, and we're finding this is much more common than we believed, maybe even just 5 years ago. So type 3 means that your lipedema is from your waist to your ankles. But these people, the most common type is they also had that presentation along with their arms. And the most common was stage 2 in a 3-stage system. So it's in that moderate level. So now let's look at the outcomes as far as first compliance. How compliant was each group for whatever their stated diet was? Well, both groups really did really well at staying right about at 1,200 calories or even a tiny bit less. I mean, they really were very, very good with that. And then even though that both groups, remember, they were told to have 60 grams of protein per day, the low carb group actually ate a little bit more on average. They had almost 70 grams of did I say carbs? Protein. It was, they had a little bit more than the 60 grams of protein. They had almost 70. And the control diet group ate a little bit less protein. So they got 56 grams per day on average instead of the 60. And then looking at the carbohydrates, the low carb group actually ate less carbs than they were suggested to eat. Remember, they said they can have up to 75 grams, and on average, they only had 66. So that's interesting. They kind of self-limited a little bit more. But the control diet group, who had 17 people kicked out of the analysis because they were actually in ketosis. This is what I don't understand. They were they were told to have 180 grams of carbs per day, and they actually had 204. So that is a big question I have on that. Can't figure out why a lot of them were in ketosis if they were having that many carbs. And then when it comes to fat, interestingly, just like it was with protein, they didn't really hit the mark on there. So the low carb group had more fat than they were asked to have, not that much more, 75.5 grams instead of 73 grams. But then, of course, the opposite in the control diet group, they had less fat than they were asked to have. And so they were asked to have only 27 grams, and they actually had only 24.5 on average. So they limited that. So they had more carbs and even less fat in that group. Very interesting. Just how, people kind of naturally slide into what is comfortable for them. You're gonna just do that. And then pain, the low carb group had significant reductions in pain, and the control diet group did not. That was the biggest outcome of this study. And the second biggest outcome is that pain reduction, the magnitude of the pain reduction seemed to be not associated at all with the weight loss. That although they did lose weight, that pain was not associated with that. Very interesting. So let's look at weight loss. So the low carb group actually lost twice as much weight in the 8 weeks compared to the high carb control diet group. So it was the low carb group lost 2.8 kilograms, or that's just over 6 pounds. And the control diet group lost 1.5 kilograms. That's about 3.3 pounds. So 6.2 to 3.3. So almost twice as much weight lost in the low carb group, but not a huge amount. It was only 8 weeks. And percent body fat. So both groups had a reduction in percent body fat, but the low carb group had almost twice as much reduction in percent body fat. And then ketosis. This was another interesting thing, that no association was seen between changes in pain and ketosis levels. So that's really interesting, because one of the mechanisms that we were guessing is that maybe it's the ketone bodies themselves that are helping reduce the pain. Not so in this study. We're not sure what that mechanism is. And then the quality of life measures, both groups had an improvement in quality of life. But interestingly, the disease specific, well, as specific as we can get, the lymphedema quality of life measure, only the low carb group had improvements in that disease specific quality of life tool, whereas the controlled diet people did not. So very interesting study. I highly recommend following the link and reading this for yourself. It's well written and easy to understand. The strengths that they talked about in this paper of their study is that, well, this is the first randomized controlled trial. So looking at diet and lipedema. Also, the study had a really relatively low dropout rate, even though some people were removed from the statistical analysis. They stuck with it. They only had 11% dropout. Interestingly, the controlled diet group had a little bit more dropouts than the low carb diet group did, but still not very much out of either. The low carb diet group lost 3 out of their 35, and the controlled diet group lost 5 out of 35. So very, very good. A couple of limitations to the study. It's really good when the authors, the researchers know the potential limitations and they list those for the reader to understand that there might have been some things that could have made this stronger, something potential for bias and things like that. And so they did list quite a few on here. One was that they were running the study when we were having the COVID-19 lockdowns. And so people were not able to come in for as many face-to-face meetings as they would have liked. They think they may have had even fewer dropouts and better adherence to diet if they had able to have more face-to-face meetings. But that also meant that they couldn't do as many measures of ketosis as they would have liked. They ended up only doing the ketosis measures. Remember, they were doing the finger pricks and also the urine sticks, and that only happened 3 times, at baseline, at week 5, and then post-intervention. They planned to do it every week. So that's unfortunate. And then also they said, as with pretty much every nutrition study, the people that were randomized into the groups, they knew which group they were in. So because you can't disguise what you're eating unless you're just giving them a shake or something like that. So they all knew what group they were in. And so the researchers realized that this could have biased their, since they knew what group they were in, maybe with some self-report measures, that it could bias them because maybe they've heard of other research papers that showed that we really have this fabulous response to carbohydrate restriction. And so that could have created a bias. And then this next limitation I thought was very, very insightful. They said that even though all the participants had a diagnosis of lipedema, this could be questioned because of the lack of standardized diagnostic criteria for lipedema. And so meaning that our suggested framework for a case definition for lipedema had not been published yet. And this is what we're trying to do, have a standardized way to decide who has lipedema and who doesn't, who should be in a study in a lipedema group and who should not be in a lipedema group because they don't have these standardized symptoms. And so they said that could be a limitation of the study because they have no idea if it's in relation, if it meets the criteria for other people studying the same thing. They don't know if they have a group of patients that all meet those same standardized diagnostic criteria. Also, they thought that the sample size might have been too small, particularly for looking at quality of life measures. And then also the intervention was only 8 weeks. They thought that might have been too short. But the conclusions they came to with this is a low carb diet seems to be, and remember, this is not even the ketogenic levels. This is just low carb, seems to be superior than a standard low fat diet for lipedema related pain. And these results seem to be independent of weight loss. And so the authors recommended continued research and hopefully next time having a larger sample size, having a longer intervention period to confirm these results and hopefully learn more about what are the underlying mechanisms for why this is happening. So as you can understand, because this is really my big interest in lipedema is looking at nutrition, this study can be really, really important for patients with lipedema because it may help you be more effective in your chosen way to manage your lipedema, because you know that the science and the studies show that this seems to work. So we've just had an incredible number of studies in the last 5 years about carbohydrate restriction and ketogenic and lipedema. And so I'm thinking this is definitely something worth pursuing and looking into even more. So check out that paper. I'm going to now look at your comments, because I know you guys have been active and saying stuff in the chat. Hi, Kay from Illinois, and Sing It is here from Chicago. Carolyn from Kennewick, Washington, and Karen from Michigan. Wonderful. Thanks for being here. And Sing It says, most certain that my attempt at keto carnivore fasting the last 5 years is why my pain is nowhere near what I'm hearing it should be. Or it could be. I hopefully there's no should, that everybody has to have a certain level of pain. But I know what you're saying, that more than likely, without even knowing the mechanism of why it works, because you've restricted your carbohydrates and maybe giving yourself some good healthy fats, something in there has really helped with your pain, and I'm thrilled to hear it. Let's see what else we got here. Sing It also says, my therapist said I'm between stage 1 and 2, but my bat wings are there. And you're referring to the lipedema that's presenting in your arms. I probably couldn't have been in the study. Nothing that would have kept you from being in the study except that you don't speak Norwegian. So there were people with stage 1 and people with stage 3. It's just that the most common presentation in this study was stage 2, and that type 3 combined with type 4, which it sounds like you might be. So yeah, you definitely could have been in it. Stephanie says, thank you, Leslyn. I appreciate these live chats. I have been carnivore for 27 months. Wow. With incredible results. Fabulous. My pain levels have improved significantly. I have lost over 200 pounds. That is astounding, Stephanie. And thank you for sharing that with us. That's pretty amazing. Just a little over 2 years to have accomplished that. Well done. And I'm glad that your pain levels have really improved significantly. And I would guess probably your mobility has improved significantly as well. So well done. Wow, you guys are still posting stuff in the chat. I just have a couple more things I wanted to share with you, because while we're on the topic of nutrition, we have a fabulous webinar coming up. It's free. It's on Monday, May 13 at 4 p.m. Eastern. It is Sleep and Satiety Simplified. Ever wondered what the impact of your diet has on your sleep? Come to this webinar. If you have any trouble with your sleeping, any disordered sleep patterns, difficulty feeling rested, and wanting to know what you can do to improve your sleep, this is going to be a fabulous webinar by 2 really experts in this. Amber O'Hearn has been in the carnivore community and does her own research, and basically like with a literature review, and condenses it and puts it in a way so we can understand what the science has been saying. And so she's published a number of papers, and one of her fascinations has been with how does your diet impact your sleep? And of course, you know Siobhan Huggins. She's our research specialist with Lipedema Project, and she is a young woman with lipedema herself. And she has been presented at many of our, and participated in a lot of our events. So both of them together, wow, what an amazing team. And this is going to be a really amazing workshop that's probably going to have a lot of information that you can put into practice that can help you. So I highly suggest that you follow that link below, get more information, register. Remember, even if you're not available on May 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern, you will get the replay as long as you have registered. So make sure you sign up for that. And then I think I just have one other thing I wanted to be sure and tell you with, and then I'll go quickly back and see if we have any more comments. And that is our calendar for events. If you are trying to figure out when are we doing these fabulous Facebook Lives, when are we having these webinars, when are we having special events, because remember, we've got Lipedema Awareness Month coming up in June. Go to our calendar, and here's the link at lipedema-simplified.org/events-calendar. And this is where you can find out everything that's happening so you don't miss anything. And remember those things that you need to register for so that you can get the replays later. It'll all be here on this calendar. Link to it and take you right to it, and you can sign up. So that's a really valuable tool to make sure you keep abreast of everything that's happening. And I am just looking really quick to see what else has been put in the comments, because I love that you guys put things in here. And Kay says, will be interesting to see what comes of the study related to less pain and why. And that is exactly what they were talking about, Kay, in here, is that they said we really need to understand the mechanisms that are happening here so that this can be a freely available approach for people battling with lipedema to help them through this. And so they want it to be a longer duration study, a larger group. I think this is you're absolutely right, Kay. We're going to be following it to find out what is happening. And my next question was about waking up at night. Yes, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Any of that disrupted sleep. Remember, your lymphatics in your brain, that's when they do their best work, is they're cleaning out that junk in your brain when you're in deep sleep. And if you keep waking up at night and you're not getting a lot of that good deep sleep, you're going to have issues. And so what can we do to improve that? Come to this webinar. So I'm glad that you registered and you're going to be there. Well, you've done it again. You spent another 30 minutes with me talking about all this stuff that's happening with lipedema, and it was wonderful to be here with you. I am going to be here again in 2 weeks with another update. This time, I'm really going to focus on mothers and how lipedema is the mother of our species, all the wonderful things that historic women with lipedema have done for us. So make sure you tune in with me next time when I'm here for those research updates. See you everybody later. Bye-bye.